Hello, everybody. This is Johnny Akzam coming to you live with Fight for FJG. I'm sitting here with none other than Fadhel Kaboub, who is, among other things, or an associate professor of economics at Denison, the president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity, and an advisory board member of Fight for FJG, our budding organization for teaching people and educating people about the federal job guarantee and the relationship really money has with us in society. So, with that, Fadhel, tell us, what is the purpose of money?
Well, in the capitalist system we live in, at least for the last several thousand years, the system is driven by credit. What's his name? That guy, Karl Marx. He said, the system starts with M prime. You start with a certain amount of money to buy a bunch of commodities, including labor commodities and inputs. You combine them into a production process, and you produce a commodity C prime, which you want to sell. And then you earn M prime. And the goal of the capitalist production is not really to produce the C prime, the commodity, but to earn M prime, which is the higher value in the production process. So the whole system is driven by money. And government, what we've discovered over the years is that governments or authorities have always created the monetary system and designed the monetary system for us through taxation. So the big myth about money that most people to this day still believe in is that somehow it was invented by the private sector and governments came in later as participants and use it in the same way as the private sector uses it, which means as a household, you earn an income, then you spend it. You can borrow a little bit up to a certain limit, but then you have debt, which you have to work even harder to pay off. Same thing for businesses, same thing for states and municipalities at the local level. But then we apply that logic to the federal government, to the sovereign issue of the currency, and we say the federal government needs to, follow sound finance principles like the rest of us, balance your budget and balance your books. And that's where things get messed up in our understanding of how the system actually works.
Why is that?
Well, partly because the analogy is just so easy to connect with, and culturally also we've been so used to the idea of balancing your checkbook and acting and spending responsibly and paying your bills and paying your debt. So that's very easy for politicians who are running for national office to say, listen, I'm like you, I'm a responsible person. I sit at the kitchen table and I balance my checkbook. Vote for me and I'll do the same. I'll make Washington just as responple as you and I. It's a question of fairness, right? Mm-hmm. So
but it doesn't work that way.
When they run for office, they a lot of them believe in the analogy, but even those who don't believe in it and believe in deficit spending and the importance of the federal government, creating money to expand the economy and invest in the economy or, fund wars or whatever the priorities are, they find it too easy as a political tool. So they just follow the same script, right? And it's a challenge for us today when we're facing a climate crisis, an inequality crisis, a poverty crisis, a public health crisis, an education crisis, to say, listen, we want to fix this. We have the brain power, we have the technological resources, we have the human capabilities to do it. The only missing piece of the puzzle is money, which needs to come from the sovereign issuer of the currency. If the federal government refuses to do it, then we're stuck at the state and city level having to tax each other or tax something or tax somebody or borrow from somebody in order to fund it. And that's where most communities are stuck. And then inequality gets reinforced and socioeconomic exclusion gets reinforced, and it's just a race to the bottom. And it's politically speaking, it's divide and conquer between communities who say, well, we're wealthier here, we have higher real estate values, why do you want to tax us? We're going to make our little town exclusive for our kids, and you go find some funding for your school district somewhere else. So that becomes just self-destructive. It's
everybody's competing for the same amount of tokens, and there's no increase.
There's a scarcity of money.
I think one of the things that I've noticed that people don't understand when we talk about the responsibility of money of the government and its relationship with money in a sovereign government is that it only stands to reason that if the population grows and those people, when they grow up, they have more needs. They now need a house. They need a vehicle, and they start consuming more than they did when they were a child. Then there needs to be more tokens in the system for those people, for that larger population to play with. Otherwise, there's fewer tokens for everyone to play with, and that means they have less. And it continues to spiral down. Now, that happens a few different ways, of course. It happens with the inequality of the tax system that we have now. We've seen the wealth and income disparities. But it also happens with the relationship that we have with labor.
Right.
And that's where we talk about with the federal job guarantee. How does the federal job guarantee come into play with stabilizing our economy for us?
So the capitalist system naturally, by design, doesn't guarantee full employment, because the private sector is driven by for-profit motivations, and it's not going to hire people just because it's a charity, just because it wants to give them jobs. If anything, the incentive in the capitalist system is to automate more and use less labor and cut costs as much as possible. So that's the nature of the system. So it automatically produces a certain pool of unemployment. And it's been the case since the beginning, since the Industrial Revolution. That's where mass unemployment appears for the first time in history, was with the Industrial Revolution. And we're not going to fight technological advance. We're not going to fight, or we shouldn't fight, technological innovation. And if we find machines or artificial intelligence or robots to produce things better, faster, cleaner, cheaper for us to enjoy, so be it. The question is, what do we do with the displaced labor? And what have we done with the displaced labor from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution is that we invented new ways of doing things and created new markets and new products. And that's in the private sector with lots of government investment and research and development in most cases. And that led to job creation in new areas and new industries. And the only way to keep up with this cycle is by investing more in skills and education and training so that we can produce the labor force that can actually take on the higher skilled jobs and the higher levels of occupation, so that we avoid the displacement of the new technology. Even that is not sufficient to absorb all the unemployed. So then typically the system blames the individuals, or at least the mainstream interpretation of the system blames the individuals for not having the skills, the experience, the productivity. So you blame the individuals for being unemployed when the system by design displaces labor. So the job guarantee is introduced here as an add-on buffer stock, as a system that will automatically absorb those who are unemployed by the private sector and put people to work in useful, productive activities that build skills and experience for those individuals, but also build resources and provide services that are not provided by the private sector or are unaffordable, provided but unaffordable for most communities, or are just undersupplied. And with the advance of this, what some people call the fourth industrial revolution, artificial intelligence and the robots are coming, a lot of people are saying, well, there isn't going to be any work. I mean, this is the end of work, some people say. As I said many times, let the robots do the precarious work, the dangerous work, the repetitive work, and let's focus our human capabilities on the care economy, caring for people, caring
education, healthcare, elder care,
caring
child
for the planet.
caring for the planet.
Labor intensive. That's not something that you can automate. And even if you automate it, you're not going to provide the same caring quality that you do with human beings. That being said, in the healthcare industry, if using a robot will improve healthcare for helping older people move from the bathroom to their bed, or facilitating the physical activity with technological advances, so be it. But nothing can replace the human care that's provided just by being there, just by talking, just by interacting. And this is not just me making this up. There's tons of research showing that having a human being interact with an elderly person tremendously improves their quality of life.
Well, that even goes with pets. I mean, they've introduced pets into hospitals as part of therapeutic. So you can't totally remove nature from people. We're social beings. The other aspect of that is that there was a time when one job in the family, in the household, was capable of taking care of everybody. You didn't need 3 and 4 jobs per household, even if that was only 1 or 2 individuals. That's what we have currently. So if there are fewer jobs, but we're paying people a remunerable amount of compensation for work that they're doing so that they can provide for their families, then we don't need 13 million jobs. We only need 7 million jobs.
Right.
For example,
there's a couple of things that happened in the 70s and 80s that made that that gap even more alarming for us to deal with today, which is the rise in productivity has been going on for decades, but wages started to stagnate in the U.S. in particular in the mid-1970s and 1980s to the present, essentially. Right. So the gap between wages and productivity. So the gain going to the top, right? The top income earners. Another component of that transition in the 1980s is globalization, which means you can't bargain. Even if you're a union, you can't bargain for those jobs because they're gone, they're out of the country. And now the production is outsourced out of the country, but the goods are coming back for sale in this country. This is the largest consumer market. So you have that kind of pressure also that kept wages down, and productivity keeps increasing, and the gains from that system, the globalization system and the higher productivity system, is going to the top. So that feeds into inequality. The question then becomes, how did the US economy continue to grow when 70% of economic growth in the US is consumer spending? So you would think once you kill wages at the base, you kill economic growth. And that's where Wall Street comes in. This is where access to credit and consumer debt becomes this fictitious access to purchasing power that becomes a heavy burden on consumers, and it becomes also a political tool. Even Alan Greenspan himself said it when he was testifying before Congress. He said, consumer debt and mortgage debt is actually a good thing because it keeps people working hard, and they can't, be too demanding for wages and benefits, because if they lose their job, they lose everything because they have too much debt. So even Greenspan saw that as a tool to keep things stable. So shifting the burden on the working class is, you might say, by design, has been introduced by design in this neoliberal political and economic system. So these are the things that need to be untangled, and the job guarantee tackles this, systematically. So the job guarantee as a buffer stock, it takes people as they are, where they are, and provides jobs and on-the-job paid training, which includes education, to provide useful and productive services to the communities that need it the most, and pays a living wage with benefits so that people don't have to live under the burden of consumer debt and student debt and all of that. And I mean, the ultimate compilation of the job guarantee is this broader version of it, which is the Green New Deal, which includes the job guarantee as the basis, but it has the green component to deal with climate crisis. It includes Medicare for all to deal with a major cost for consumers and businesses, which is the healthcare cost, is a major driver for inflation. And it's a major source of inefficiency in the US economy.
And we've already proven, or the other side has already proven for us, that it's even more cost effective.
Sure.
It costs less. So that argument is really out the window. It's not going to raise taxes. If anything, it could possibly be deflationary.
I'll give you an example. The other day I was at a conference in Pennsylvania. I was having lunch with a doctor who was there for the conference. So we started talking. I told him, what do you do? He was maybe in his mid-50s or something like that, mid to late career. And he said, well, he used to practice for 20 some years, but now he works for an insurance company. I said, what do you do at the insurance company? He said, I sit in the office all day and do paperwork. So I started digging, like, what kind of paperwork? What do you do? I mean, with all your experience and education and talent as a medical professional, why are you doing paperwork? He said, well, because when your doctor bills you, there's all kinds of stuff that happens in the back office, all kinds of paperwork that they have to fill out. So they have to hire, the hospitals, they have to hire a whole bunch of people to do the paperwork and send to the insurance company. And then he said, the paperwork comes to my office, and now my job is to make sure that everything that was billed was actually medically necessary. And that's where my job is
restricting access
and verifying that, whatever needed to be done. Now, granted that this doctor sitting in the back office in an insurance company hasn't seen the patient, wasn't there during the surgery. The paperwork may not be 100% complete to justify the use of these things. But in addition to all of that inefficiency, instead of having this talented, experienced medical professional treat patients, we're having them do the paperwork. What an inefficient system. So when you talk about the cost of insurance, it's the cost of all of this inefficiency. And of course, he's not paid as an office clerk. He's paid as a medical professional. And his salary is probably much higher than what he was paid at the hospital. So this is messed up. We can't have a system like this. So when we go to Medicare, which is what most industrialized countries have, there is a huge cost saving, and there's going to be a huge displacement of workers in this paperwork pushing industry in the insurance business. So having the job guarantee is not just for just transition for coal miners and fossil fuel workers. It's also for Medicare, for insurance workers, or just like you and I, they got the job and they have to do their job to transition into something else. So create a more efficient healthcare system that actually delivers healthcare services as opposed to focuses on making money and all of this inefficient paperwork, stuff that insurance companies do. So when we talk about the Green New Deal, it's really an umbrella set of policies that has climate at the center, the job guarantee as a key component, and a just transition as justice for workers who will be displaced, because this is a massive transformation of the economy. And it's really meant to be, the US taking leadership globally in this new initiative, because we're not going to win this if it's just the US doing it. It's got to be everybody else. This is a global climate crisis. We have a global inequality crisis. We have a global healthcare crisis, because the baby boomers in the US are not the only baby boomers. There's baby boomers around the world, and they're all retiring at the same time, and they all need medical services around the same time. And we haven't invested enough in producing doctors and nurses and medical equipment to deal with the global retirement crisis that we're dealing with. Most people, what they're looking at is the global retirement crisis. Where's the money going to come from to pay the retirees? Nobody's asking, where will the services and the real resources come from? And the real resources are doctors and nurses and medical technicians that need to be educated and trained and experienced to be ready on time for when the crisis actually hits.
Which is an interesting aspect of the workers that are going to be out of work from the insurance companies. Is if you think about it, there's going to be a large influx of patients once Medicare for All gets passed. I mean, people are going to go to the doctor to get their regular checkups.
Sure.
And there could be at least a portion of those workers that could be utilized for processing patients.
Sure.
When I talk to people about the federal job guarantee, I talk about community clinics where nursing students and people that would otherwise not be making $15 an hour at a nursing home, making maybe 12 or 13, could be working and doing things like the sniffles and flu shots and whatever kind of things that don't take necessarily a practitioner to oversee.
Right.
Now, when you talked about, we talked a little bit about automation and letting people do letting machines do the work. And you know that as well as I do when we talk about those things and how, hey, in less than 10 years, robots are going to be doing everything for us. I mean, they're going to be feeding us our cereal, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
That brings up the whole idea of the UBI, right, and just giving people, now, of course, we understand that there's different components to the UBI. The most popular right now is Andrew Yang throwing out his idea. Why is, in your opinion, from your perspective, why is the UBI not a superior option as the federal job guarantee?
Well, several reasons, but the top thing on my list is climate change and climate crisis, because this is a question of extinction. So you have millions of people who want to work. We have technologies that are getting cheaper by the day, solar and wind and tidal technology and geothermal. And we have, the planet is on fire. So you have these three pieces of the puzzle on the table. And how would the UBI solve this? It wouldn't. Well, we need all hands on deck. We need massive amount of labor resources, and the more skilled, the better over time to address this climate crisis. So the idea of giving everybody $1,200 a month or $1,000 a month is not going to come even close to doing any of the work that needs to be done in the US or globally. So that's number one. And number two, people want to work. Most people want to work, but they don't want to work miserable jobs. They don't want miserable pay. They don't want slave-like conditions. So this is where some of the UBI arguments come in a little bit. Well, they say, well, you might as well give them the money to stay home instead of forcing people to work, miserable jobs. That's totally reasonable. But that's also small thinking when we think that the only options that we have on the table are miserable jobs. That we
or staying home, right? Stay home or work a miserable job. That's all we got. We're a failed society as soon as we think that.
The other thing that we have to worry about, which is who are the biggest pushers for a UBI. And this is, a lot of it comes from Silicon Valley or friends of the Silicon Valley, like Andrew Yang, who are, Andrew Yang he points to the right issues of inequality, good jobs, and climate crisis, all of this. But then his solution is $1,000 a month. Yes, if you give me $1,000, I'm not going to throw it away. I'm going to use it, right? And it's good. But I'd rather have everybody get a decent wage and benefits than distribute $1,000 without providing jobs and benefits, because it's going to turn into a subsidy to low-paying jobs. And
exactly. Why
do you think Silicon Valley is so excited about this? Because they want to Uberize the economy. They want everybody to hustle for part-time jobs, for Uber, for all of these jobs, and then have the UBI subsidize them so that they can pay rent.
Yep.
Hustle for money left and right with no benefits and no retirement and nothing. You're on your own.
And plus, you set what I like about the federal job guarantee is it flips the script on labor, the relationship with labor and bosses now. Because if Bob is treating you like crap, which we know a lot of bosses just treat people like crap, And it doesn't always have to do with money. He could be paying you $3 more an hour than what you can get at the job guarantee. But if he finally steps on you that one day and you just say, I can't take this anymore, I don't deserve this treatment, Bob, you do realize I can still go pay my bills. I can still go get a job where I can have health benefits, paid leave. And one of the things that people often forget is when people are not in the workforce, they become less hireable. Right. And it doesn't matter why you're not in the workforce. I'm a contractor myself. I'm in this gig economy. I've been doing it for a decade. I went from building homes to building websites. And now if I want to get back into the workforce, it's difficult for me because they look at this big gap. They say, where were you? I say, well, I was running my own business. Well, okay, what's going on with that? Now they want to know, well, if something else comes along, you're not going to stick around here. So it makes it more difficult for me to get a job at a regular, stable, private sector institution because they're wondering about this big gap and everything. Now, we talked a lot about the job guarantee and the Green New Deal. People, they understand, some people, they understand that the Green New Deal is a kibosh of a lot of different policies, including the federal job guarantee, the Medicare for all, climate change, renewable energy. How do you see the federal job guarantee working? Because we know that things like huge infrastructure investment is separate from the job guarantee because we're not going to be paying people $15, $20 an hour to do $100 an hour jobs. Sure. So what kind of jobs do you see interacting with the Green New Deal infrastructure rebuilding that can be fit into the job guarantee program?
All right. So to take a couple of steps back about the job guarantee, and I'm going to use the older name for the job guarantee that Minsky used, which is the employer of last resort, right? The government as the employer of last resort, because that's really more meaningful for what we're talking about. So number one, if we understand the monetary sovereignty of the federal government and the power of the purse, then there's a whole bunch of things that can be brought back in line at full pay with benefits. So I'm talking about the last 4 decades worth of downsizing and shifting the burden on states and local governments and municipalities. So step number one, once we recognize that, before we even get to the job guarantee, is full funding for major infrastructure across the country, full funding for education, universal health, all the basic things that have been shifted down to the local level. And that reduces the tax burden on local communities, reduces the burden on states and municipalities. That's number one and that's paying people competitive wages with benefits, right? Mm-hmm. So then that absorbs quite a bit of the unemployed. But there's going to be, because of the nature of capitalism produces unemployment, there's going to be people who are typically labeled by the private sector as unemployable. Those who, women and minorities and people with disabilities and returning citizens, those are who are first to be fired when there's a recession and last to be hired when there's an economic boom. That's really what the employer of last resort is meant to be, that safety net that takes people as they are, where they are. So when we talk about, scaling up government spending on infrastructure and education and all of that stuff, and building high-speed rail, that's competitive wages. This is not the $15 an hour type of jobs, right? The job guarantee component is meant to be the last resort, the safety net that takes people as they are, where they are, pays a decent wage and benefits, and includes training and educational components and a broader set of benefits. Because benefits for privileged individuals is a very different thing than benefits in the broadest sense of the term for somebody who's been unemployed for 5-10 years, who's been recovering from an addiction, who's spent time in prison, who's been socioeconomically excluded from the whole system for a decade. And now the government shows up and says, we have a job guarantee. We'll give you a decent wage. We'll give you benefits with, retirements and whatever. And now you're supposed to do great, right? Because we give you everything, a living wage, benefits. But that doesn't mean that individual will be able to thrive on the job, because the economic and the social devastation and the health devastation they went through in the last 10 years is not the same as the devastation of somebody who's been unemployed for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month without going to prison, without going through addiction, without going through divorce, without going through all of those things. So when we talk about the employer of last resort and the job guarantee, the benefits package has to be a more comprehensive system that repairs the socioeconomic structure within which those individuals have lived in the last 10 years, and more in some cases. So that's the part that needs to be really tailor-made to the needs of each community. And with the opioid crisis now a national crisis, it's not just a Central Ohio crisis anymore, this has to be a component of the job guarantee, that you offer the job, you offer the benefits, but you have to offer a broader benefits package that includes treatment, that includes developing social skills, that includes rehabilitation, that includes
lifting people up.
Exactly. And building a social network to allow people to thrive on the job. Because if you just offer the job and benefits, and they show up for the first 2 days and then they don't come back because they're physically and mentally not capable of keeping a job, not because they don't want to, but because they're physically and mentally incapable of doing it, then we're going to put the blame on them and say, we offered them everything, they didn't want to show up, it's their problem, right? That's our failure, because we're not recognizing the needs of those particular individuals. And if we want to lift everybody up, we have to provide the resources. And the resources is more than money. It's care in the fullest sense of the term. So when I think about the Green New Deal or the job guarantee, we have to separate those pieces out. The big infrastructure nationwide, retooling the entire energy production industry, weatherizing homes across the country, because that's a huge chunk of energy is lost because homes are old and badly insulated. And then we get down to the local level, where you really have to work with local community organizers who have been dealing with these problems for a long time, but have been understaffed, underfunded, and understaffed not just in terms of having people to volunteer or help, but when I say understaffed, having no access to rehab facilities and professionals who actually know how to help rebuild people's lives. That's where the care economy comes in for returning citizens, for people recovering from addiction. It's labor intensive, it's care intensive, and having the job and the wage and monetary benefits doesn't fix it, because you need more than that to thrive as an individual.
Yeah, definitely. Now, when we talk about some of the cost of investing in the Green New Deal, for instance, okay, we've gone over Medicare for All, and we know that it's been proven that it costs less. I don't know if you saw just recently, over the last week or so, there was a Stanford professor who was on MSNBC. You saw that?
Jacobson, yes.
Okay, so he's been telling us that we're spending too much money on our current system.
Right.
That if we would transition, then we would end up saving money, because it costs money to extract the fuel that we currently use. So we're using fuel as we're extracting it, rather than setting something up and letting it ride and create prosperity for us.
Right. So this is true across the board for healthcare, for education. I mean, we tend to not fully, account for all the costs that are involved in the current system.
And that's not even
about the Green New Deal. How are we going to pay for it? I say we're already paying for it many times over, but we're not solving the problem, because we're just addressing the symptoms.
And that doesn't even address some of the more deeper, nuanced sociological issues and psychological issues that people get from like not having a job, the depression, anxiety, stress, everything that goes along with that ends up costing sometimes even more.
Right. I mean, think of underfunded schools and what it does to individuals, to families, to communities, and to the nation. So when you have schools, underfunded schools with no after-school programs, no activities for youth, summer programs, summer camps, no music, no theater, no sports, what do you expect will happen to those kids? Kids are kids, and teenagers are teenagers. They're going to do silly, stupid things, dangerous things that any young person will do. So would we rather spend some money hiring people doing arts
After
and crafts
school
and
programs, making sure there's
music
constantly
to produce the next generation of talented writers and talented musicians and talented just human beings, creative human beings that will work for Microsoft and work for, build the next set of technologies for the country, or save that money, not spend it, and then build a prison for them 15 years later.
Yeah.
In many towns, that's the direct correlation.
That is exactly. We've been dealing with that a lot.
You build a prison, then every prisoner is costing the city or the state or the federal government $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year to house in a prison. Which one is cheaper? This is what we're already paying for. Right? So is it cheaper and better quality of life for everyone to invest in education, to invest in all of these things and create the right kinds of jobs as opposed to prison guard jobs? That's not to say that we should fire all the prison guards, and this is where the just transition comes in, that we have to reinvent the economy in the right way and transition people to meaningful, fulfilling jobs that most prison guards don't enjoy their job. It's a miserable, stressful job. Right?
What do you say to people who say, well, look, we're just one country. We're just the U.S. We're a world leader, but if China and India, those are the two big ones they always pick out because they're the big population centers, right? Or if people in Africa are not adhering to climate change, then what good is it? Why should we be the only ones sacrificing all of this, effort into trying? It's just, whether it's a hoax or not, we're not going to make a difference if the other countries aren't doing anything. What do you say to that?
Well, the truth of the matter is that the U.S. is the world leader when it comes to pretty much everything. And the world leader doesn't mean that you do something and then the rest of the world decides to follow you or copy you. World leader in the sense that when the U.S., digs its heels and says, this is the way it's going to be, that's the way it's going to be. Usually in war and peace issues. But here we're saying, in war and political conflict type of situations, but here it's leadership and doing the right thing. And it's economically beneficial to the U.S. The U.S. is the world leader in terms of technological innovations that will be used to solve the climate crisis. And as many of the Green New Deal supporters have been saying, this is a way for the U.S. to start exporting, building these technologies here, and exporting and deploying them across the world. Because we're in this thing together. It's not like, we're going to save the world for us, but not for the rest of the world, or vice versa. So everybody has to be on the same page. China is already doing plenty without a Green New Deal to save itself from suffocating, to save itself from popular uprising because people can't breathe. So this is a necessity, whether we do it now or full scale or do it 10 years or 20 years later because there's a massive refugee crisis and massive uprisings across the world because people can't breathe, because people don't have access to food or clean water. It's going to happen one way or the other. It's going to happen
everywhere. Yeah.
Exactly. So we want this to be done the right way, in a positive way that creates jobs, lifts people out of poverty across the world, and gives people better quality of life. It's a no-brainer.
Now of course, we're quite a ways away from actual legislation that has hard numbers for things like the job guarantee. We're talking $15 an hour now. By the time we get there, we're probably looking at $20 an hour.
Yeah.
How do you foresee? We've talked to a few different people on our channel about how they foresee the payment structure. Like how does the money get allotted to the program? Who should get the money? Like Warren Mosler talks about, well, we would start with, national government jobs and then state and then other things like that.
Yeah.
What's your rollout plan, if you will, for
So
the job?
earlier, it's scaling up federal government spending on major infrastructure that's federal spending. So in the same way the government gets bids for building highways, for building ports, for building, for buying military equipment, you do it through the same bidding process, and you hire and build the infrastructure. You allocate funding for states, for education, for after-school programs, for all the things that need to be done at the state level and city level. And then you go down to nonprofit organizations, which is your microcosm of where socioeconomic dislocation has been happening in the last 40 years, because these are the organizations that have been doing their best to step up and fill the gap left by the federal government and state governments and underfunded schools. They're the ones who deal with domestic violence and homelessness and poverty-related issues. So they know the people, they know the needs of every community, and they've been doing the work, but they've been understaffed and underfunded for a long time. And this is where we're not reinventing the wheels. The organizations are there. They have a track record. They've been doing great work with very limited resources. The federal government can provide grants to those organizations to hire additional staff, to get the resources they need to address the needs of the local community. So I see it as 3 tiers: federal, state, and local government, and then nonprofits to deal with the employer of last resort and kind of the broader aspect of benefits for people who have been socioeconomically dislocated for a long time. So grants,
sounds like
grants. This is not really. Some of those organizations already receive grants from state and federal agencies, but the amounts are small. Usually the grants make it very specific that you can't use the money to hire people. It has to be directly serving people, which is, you can't run an organization without hiring people. So you rely on volunteers who come and go. So there's a lot of, lack of experience, lack of commitment, all kinds of, inefficiencies happen when you have well-meaning, people with big hearts who volunteer to provide these services, but you can't run an organization effectively when half of your time you're trying to manage the schedule for 20 random volunteers coming and going.
Well, now, what do you think about in a situation like that where the workers themselves are receiving a paycheck directly for hours worked from the federal government, much like a Social Security check or a disability check?
Right.
And the programs themselves can be approved by local community commissions that are, they're put together to decide what jobs that community needs that benefit the community as a whole, whether it's cleaning up a park, whether it's staffing a childcare facility 24/7, whatever it is. The labor gets paid for directly from the federal government as the worker earns it, rather than putting grants out that sometimes we find, like you said, some of these grants they don't get allocated to people, even if they're for employment. So what you can have is a series of just, like we have the Diversity Council here. They deal with diversity issues and they're trying to make sure people are educated on that. And like you said, they're staffed by volunteers, people who pretty much probably work a full-time job and then put in as much extra time as they can trying to fill in. But if you could just say, hey, you know what? The community sees that this entity, nonprofit entity, serves a purpose and always has in our community, and we want to help them, stabilize their help. We authorize them to hire 5 people 40 hours a week at the job guarantee benefit.
Right.
And then you don't even have to worry about the money going through the entity and being grant blocked out and handed out.
The more participatory the job guarantee is, the better for democracy, the better for transparency, and the more efficiency you get out of it. Because you have community ownership of what are the priorities that need to be done and how the program is going to be managed. And that's how you get the most out of this. So I agree.
Okay, let me ask you. I'll just ask you one more. I know you got to get going. In what, and this goes along with this. In one of your talks, you mentioned that you were working on a resolution for local and state governments to sign on to
Yes.
in support of the Green New Deal. How do you see us moving forward with lobbying for the job guarantee and the Green New Deal? And have you made any progress on that resolution? Is it just for the Green New Deal, or can it be like, can Fight for FJG take a portion out and go present it to our city council?
So so there was a resolution at one particular city council that got edited and re-edited, and people were divided about the language that should go in there and whatever. So that's been on hold right now. The next step is to develop a resolution that includes all the things that we want to include in it from an MMT standpoint, a job guarantee standpoint. The difficulty is when you pass it on to different city councils, if they're not educated enough about how to pay for it and what is affordable, and start thinking in really limited terms, then you get a whole different language that defeats the purpose of having a resolution. So what we're trying to do as much as possible is have a lot of these town hall meetings about, the green, because the Green New Deal document, the resolution, is aspirational. It says this is, imagine the sky's the limit. These are all the things that can be done. But a lot of the supporters of the Green New Deal still don't understand how to pay for it. And this is the right time, with all the debates that are happening in the mainstream media about MMT. This is a great opportunity to jump in with all of these town hall meetings and community gatherings to educate people, empower people with the answer to how do we pay for it, can we afford it? And once people realize for real, for sure, they have fully understand that they've been told they can't afford it, but now we realize the sky is the limit and that inflation is not necessarily a threat, we know how to manage it, then they start really thinking outside the box and fully embracing the Green New Deal, and might even come up with more progressive ideas than what we have for the Green New Deal, because different communities have different needs that you and I don't necessarily recognize or know about. And that's what we're building for, is educating as many people as possible across the country about the Green New Deal as an aspirational document, and educating about how to pay for it so that people can think big, can think transformational change as opposed to small, incremental, experimental change. So it takes a social movement, it takes organizing, and it's not happening fast enough for me. But I also recognize this takes time, and the more people we have out there organizing town halls and meeting with environmental activists, meeting with labor unions. I mean, you've seen the AFL-CIO came out against the Green New Deal last week in a very strongly worded statement, and it's because they haven't heard our part of the story. They've listened to the scare tactics of the mainstream media, that this is they're going after miners. They want to destroy their jobs and destroy their communities. And if you're part of a union as a miner, as a fossil fuel worker, which a lot of workers are unionized in those industries, and that's why the AFL-CIO was speaking on their behalf. They're saying this Green New Deal wants to kill our jobs and destroy our unions, which is nonsense. This is not what the Green New Deal is about. That's why the key word is just transition.
I don't understand that. Why they don't get that? That it's like transitioning from steam engines to to fossil fuel to combustion engines, and I mean it seems like it's the natural flow. It's not about getting rid, like killing all the cows, and nobody can have ice cream anymore, and nobody's going to be able to fly on airplanes anymore. They don't understand.
It's those scare tactics that spread this kind of fear and misinformation. So these town hall meetings, with labor leaders across the country, will help clarify what the Green New Deal is about. And if anything, labor unions from fossil fuel industries should be embracing this, because
yes, absolutely,
specifically designed for them in mind to transition into higher paying jobs, not just a just transition. Because when you think of coal miners, we're talking 50,000 people. It's not millions of workers. So transitioning to another industry that pays really well, transitioning into early retirement with bonuses and benefits is not, number one, is not expensive, even if you take it from a standard, sound money perspective. Number two, it's transitioning to solar and wind. They're higher paying jobs. They're cleaner jobs. They're healthier jobs. And they're the jobs of the future. So it eliminates the anxiety about the coal mine collapsing, about coal, being
trying to bring it back. Let's keep bringing it back and trying to resurrect it instead of transitioning into something new.
Exactly. So it takes. Sometimes I joke on social media, say, "Give me 45 minutes with these people, and I'll set the record straight." And it's still an open challenge. Give me 45 minutes with labor leaders, with informed citizens who want the right thing. Most people want clean water, clean air, good paying jobs. They want pensions, they want benefits, just like coal miners, just like everybody else. They want that, but they've been told that they can't afford it. The system will not provide it, and that the system is now ganging up against these industries because they want to save the planet, because they want to save the dolphins, so they use these tactics that your job is on the line because some people like dolphins and whales. Mm-hmm. Your job is on the line because some people can't handle cold weather or can't handle the heat in the summer. And these are scare tactics. It's not about the weather. It's not about the dolphins. This is about the rest of the system, which includes those same communities. Because when you look at coal mining towns, for example, the whole town is built around one company, and it's the mine. And if you take that away, the whole thing turns into a disaster, an economic disaster, and social, disaster. So we haven't done enough work to give people the opportunity to imagine their town designed around different kinds of jobs, with it thriving, as opposed to saying the coal mine is going to go and there's going to be nothing left. That's what people fear. And it's because over the decades, this is what they've seen. We've seen companies leave, we've seen coal mines shut down, and nothing was brought into place. There is no just transition. There is no systematic thinking about how do we capture this opportunity to revive a town in a particular way that allows people to thrive. And it's because typically it's been left to private enterprise, and private enterprise doesn't do charity. They don't do long-term planning. They do
when they can write it off.
Right, but they don't do the kind of work that needs to be done in a small town that relies on one company, one industry. So no wonder that they fear the attack on, coal mining jobs as a way of destroying communities without providing any alternative just transition. And that's definitely not the philosophy of the Green New Deal. If anything, it's by design creating components that will transition communities into healthier sources of energy, better paying jobs, and stronger communities.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful place to end. I appreciate all the time that you put into this. You know that you're one of the many rock stars that we follow, because what you're able to do is give us kind of an outline. I think that the listeners should, if you're not a big fan of Fadhel's, become one and find him. He's all over on YouTube. You help put the argument in a reasonable way, even for people who aren't quite in tune with modern monetary theory. They don't quite know how we pay for it. The idea that we've never had this issue of arguing about paying for it when we really needed to, like when we talk about World War II and other times, even the Iraq War. People, we spend on wars. We never talk about how we're going to pay for it because we find that to be a necessity. So getting people in the door to explain that we can have a better society of human beings where we're not constantly struggling, where we don't have billionaires living in a high rise, and at the base we have people living on the streets. That's one of the most unjust issues that we can face in any kind of modern society that we have. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being a part of Fight for FJG. And you take it easy, and I'll see you around the web.
We'll see you soon. Thank you. Take care.